Man, I just got done finishing a Google Chrome extension that allows you to party watch with your friends on YouTube TV. And man, was that a difficult challenge. Toward the end of each year, I like to challenge myself. I try to work on a project that allows me to encompass some of the knowledge that I've learned throughout the course of the year and to actually learn new things. And this year, I've decided to do a Google Chrome extension that allows you to watch or party share with your friends on YouTube TV. The reason I decided to do that is because there's another extension that already exists called Teleparty. I think that's what they're now called. Before, I think they were called Netflix Party. And their whole business model was essentially being like a Google Chrome extension that allows you to party share with your friends. So if both of you guys got Netflix accounts, you guys can then log in and then you guys can be synced on what you guys are watching together. And they also have a chat system in X, Y, and Z, right? And it's pretty cool. I've used it with my friends multiple times and I enjoy it. The only problem is they don't have YouTube TV. And I figured that this would be a great way to showcase some of my skills as far as when it comes to JavaScript and then learning things on the fly as well. I realized that I wouldn't have a lot of knowledge on this particular challenge, which would make it more interesting, but I knew I had enough knowledge to be able to get it done with just a certain amount of time. I just didn't know how much. So I figured it would be cool to try to challenge myself to a speed run. At first I was thinking about like 50 hours or maybe a couple days. I wasn't necessarily sure. And then I thought maybe I could just do it in one sitting. About a year ago, I had created my first Google extension that allows me to do Google News filtering. So if you go to googlenews.com and you use my extension, you're able to block certain authors and actual publishers from showing up on your Google News feed. And that was just a little test thing to kind of understand how Google Chrome extensions work. I figured that if I could do that, and I did that all in one Twitch stream sitting, that surely I could do this in about one sitting. It's either that or it's going to balloon a lot and I'm gonna have to spend multiple days on it, but I knew that I could get the job done. So if I'm gonna speedrun this, I decided to put in some constraints. Number one is that I'm not allowed to do research outside of the time frame of the speedrun. Now, I will be honest, I did look up a little bit of information and I did do a little bit of testing before the speedrun, but that was only to ensure that one of the technologies I would be using would actually be viable in this scenario. I didn't want to go 10, 20, 30 hours down the road to find out that the technology or the idea I'm doing is not even feasible. The second condition that I have is that the actual infrastructure and the code and everything that I'm doing has to be self-contained. It has to be open source and it has to be something that I am not a domain owner of. This means that I can't go and just get, let's say, like a server on Fly.io or, an app container on Azure or AWS and basically have that as the middleman for communication between what I'm trying to do. Because at the end of the day, I have many other projects to do. I work on many other things and I don't necessarily have the time to manage something. And not also that, it also opens up lines of failures in multiple different aspects. So I start off the speed run and for the first about hour to 2 hours, maybe even the third hour, I was basically just trying to test out some of the concepts of what I was thinking. The idea that I had was that I was going to use WebRTC as a peer-to-peer connection between two Google Chrome extensions so that they could talk to one another. And after that, I tried to connect up the WebRTC to the actual pop-up that you see here. And once we have those two connected, as far as using the codes, then I would be able to actually connect two Google Chrome extensions together. I was testing that and I was testing like the kick and leave signal. But as you'll soon find out, that testing of kicking and leaving is something that I'll have to keep doing over and over and over again. Now that I have it connected, let's do some of the stuff that I'm actually good with, which is DOM manipulation. So I went into the Elements tab, I went into the Network tab and the Console tab, and I start pulling information that I find useful. I start finding that there's information on the DOM that updates that I can use event listeners for. There's also the actual video element itself that comes with a bunch of different information that I'd be able to extract and then be able to play on the other side. Because if you have access to the video element, you could do something like video.play, and that would be able to allow you to actually play the video element that's on the DOM. So this was actually really easy and I actually was really happy, and I was looking forward to actually starting to connect up some of that code and functions and ideas of the DOM into the actual WebRTC connection. But this is where we reach our first issue. I noticed that the WebRTC connection was only active if the pop-ups were active. And that made sense because I put the code for the WebRTC connection in the pop-up. So if you leave the pop-up, which is just simply clicking out of the pop-up, turns out that that doesn't persist in the background anywhere. And that means that the WebRTC connection is dead. And so I do some research and I start thinking to myself, let's put it in something called the background.js, which is technically the background service worker for the Google Chrome extension. I spend about 2 hours or so basically refactoring this. And this is the first refactor. I essentially move all of the WebRTC connection code from the actual pop-up.js, so to speak, into the background.js or the background service worker. And after spending about 2 hours doing that, I try to start it up and it immediately fails, saying that it doesn't know what WebRTC is. It doesn't know what RTC peer connection is at all. And it turns out that the background service worker doesn't have access to web APIs. So I'm like, all right, maybe what I can do is have the state of the actual app and the state of the actual connection inside of the background service worker. Then I could put the WebRTC connections in maybe its own JavaScript file. So now I'm on that second refactor of basically breaking those things up. And throughout doing the second refactoring process, I found out a couple things that actually were extremely important to know. One of which is that I actually can't store the actual WebRTC variables in the background.js like I thought. I thought I could just store the variables in the background.js, therefore I could be able to reference them in the actual peer connections.js so that I can be able to do this consistent connection. But those variables don't work in that type of way where I could be able to pass them that way, so I had to actually move over the variables over to peer connection.js. And then the other thing that I learned was something called content scripts. Content scripts are injected JavaScript files into the actual DOM of whatever page you're on or whatever page that you've decided. And that's extremely helpful because now I actually have direct access to the DOM, but then I also can store the WebRTC connection directly in the YouTubeTV page, which is perfect. And at this point, I'm feeling pretty good. We're at the 13-hour mark just about, and we've done basically 2 to 3 refactors at this point. I'm just testing out that kick and leave because that's still giving me random issues at certain points, trying to figure out what's going on, and it leads me down to a rabbit hole that opens a whole can of worms. As I'm working on the kick and leave, I noticed that the app state was randomly resetting. I spoke to ChatGPT about this, and it turns out that the background service worker actually isn't persistent at all. It actually dies after being idle for about 5 minutes or so. But I'm not one to give up, especially because I've already went past 10 hours. And I decide to look and do some research and decide to do Chrome local storage. So now after doing my fourth refactor, I'm now doing testing of the kick and leave again, checking the app state once again. And then I'm like, finally, I feel good again because now we're at a point where we're doing DOM manipulation again. Now I could be able to do the stuff that I know of really well and kind of get them connected with this new thing that I've learned. I start plugging in the DOM manipulators from the video element on one side over to the other. So essentially if, for example, the host hit pause, I would be able to detect that and then send that information over through the WebRTC peer connection. And then from there, the guest would see that and it would automatically stop on the page. I was able to get pausing working, I was able to get play working, and I was able to get seeking working. So we have these 3 things working. And you'll notice at this time too, I start actually assuming that I'm going to be close to being done. I was going to do it in 30 hours, but maybe I can squeeze it all in 20 hours. This is actually impressive. The only thing left is when you change channels, I want to be able to make this change channels with it. At this time, I start exploring every option I could for being able to change the channel on the guest side. Actually being able to find what is going on the host side is not that big of a deal. The DOM changes whenever you actually change to a different channel for its video ID. So I could easily just use that and use an event listener to pick up the new ID. and extract that ID from the element and then go from there and pass that over to the actual WebRTC. So that part isn't the big deal. That's actually the easy part. The hard part is actually changing the channel on the guest. There were multiple things that I tried and thought of at the time of the speedrun. I had thought of changing the video element itself. If I have access to the direct element where I can make functions like play and pause, then most likely I would be able to actually change the channel by changing the video source. It's a URL coming from someplace. If I change it, would that work? Well, no, it instead gave an error. It would say this video is not available or something to that effect. Maybe instead go into the actual elements, the DOM, and maybe click on whatever the host clicked on. Well, that's cool, but that causes a bunch of different complexity and issues, right? Like if the host, for example, searched something and clicked on that and the actual guest has access to it, but it wasn't on their DOM, that's going to cause a problem. I can't actually like follow every single action the guest is doing. I could, but that's not my goal, and I don't want to go down that road. I don't think that's the right way to go about this. Maybe I can craft an element. Maybe I can inject an element onto the DOM that has the actual dynamic video ID from the host, but nothing happened. And when I thought about it, it made sense. In reality, that's not going to work because I applied the actual elements to the DOM afterward. So if there was some sort of underlying JavaScript, my element that I injected into the DOM wouldn't know about it at all and be hooked into it. So that wouldn't work either. When I was actually done with streaming, I actually thought to myself, what if I actually hijacked an element that actually exists already to actually then craft it with the actual new URL and then programmably clicked on it to see if it would go to the right channel. But I didn't think of that until after the speedrun. And I just wanted to give that note to anyone who may be thinking to mess with this actual code in the open source, which is in the link in the description. And at this point I was getting desperate. I mean, like, this was something I was really good at and I wasn't able to do anything, right? Like this was weird. And I'm like, I'm like, how am I not able to do this? So I'm like, all right, let's change ideas. Instead of looking at the DOM of the video player, let's look at the actual API calls from the network. When you are able to replay back most API calls and you're already authenticated either through the actual Chrome console because you already are authenticated through the browser, or if you go through a whole process of doing the login flow through, Selenium or through Python with just like pure requests.sessions and keeping the cookie information, then that information is usually successful as far as what you're trying to achieve. If I'm trying to pull information or do something as far as on the server side. However, this time it may have worked on the server side, but I may have been missing some sort of disconnect that I needed to do with the video element and it didn't work. So basically I was back to square one and I knew what I needed to do to move forward, but doing this would require another refactor. And again, if I didn't want this feature, I could just actually publish as is right now. The solution to being able to change channels would be to simply change the URL at the top. That's easy with JavaScript. That's not the problem. The problem is that I stored the WebRTC connection in the content scripts. That is a problem. So now I'm at a point where I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I'm at what I feel is at the lowest point at this point. It gets worse. And I don't know how to proceed forward, but I'm always one to have a solution. My idea is maybe if I have to change the URL and refresh the page, that I can, reconnect everything together after the page comes back using some sort of app state. I spent about 2 hours working on that and kind of talking back and forth with ChatGPT to kind of find out that WebRTC connections can't be reconnected. Now I'm at a point where I'm upset. I have no clue what to do. I'm cursing out ChatGPT and I'm figuring to myself that I just literally wasted about 20 hours. And I can't even say accidentally, I purposely and stupidly refactored the project to putting the WebRTC back into the background.js. And the reason being was, at the time I had already forgotten certain things about why the background JS didn't work. But the main thing that I had remembered as to why it didn't work is because it wasn't persistent. So I had assumed that what I can do after doing some research online is that I can make the background JS persistent by simply dinging it in some sort of way every single 5 minutes. So there's some sort of function or whatever that calls out every single 5 minutes, and that's going to be able to keep the background JS persistent. So I do that refactor for 2 hours just to then be reminded by ChatGPT that the background JS doesn't have access to any of the web APIs at all. And so I'm basically back to square one. Again, where am I going to put the WebRTC connection to make this persistent? So I keep cursing out ChatGPT a lot, and it finally came up with a good idea called off-screen scripts. It's something I didn't hear about before, but essentially, you can have a JavaScript file be persistent, and when the URL changes, the JavaScript in the off-screen script would remain persistent. So unlike the background JS, that it doesn't have any actual access to any web APIs, this actually does have access to web APIs and is persistent. And at this point, I'm really kind of nervous if anything's gonna work. This is the 6th refactor with this off-screen JS. I had to define it in the manifest file for it to actually be visible, and then I could be able to call it out from the background JS and then do a actual refactor of moving everything over for the actual WebRTC from the background JS into this off-screen script JS. And so I had to basically break up those things into what you see here. Now we have a section where you have just the actual DOM manipulators or the player controls. It's actually a content script. We have the background JS service worker to be able to be a middleman of communication between the actual content script and the actual pop-up scripts and the off-screen script as well. We have the off-screen script that handles out the WebRTC connection and then talks to the background JS for actions that need to change. And then we also have the actual pop-up scripts like the status JS and what I've now changed it to, which is called app JS, which is able to handle things on the pop-up and is able to change its state based on what the actual background JS gives it from the Chrome local storage. And once I know the off-screen script works, I start plugging in everything that I was already doing before, such as being able to play, pause, seek on the guest side from whatever the host does. And now we're back to where we were before, where essentially I'm now trying to change the channel on the guest side. And changing the channel was actually a lot more simple now. Now that we have a persistent WebRTC connection, I'd be able to actually still control what's going on even if someone changed the channel. So now that we have that done, we have everything done. And the final things for wrap up are simply go to ChatGPT and change up the actual icon. Since I was still using the Google News filter icon, I then changed up some of the graphics to make it look red because YouTubeTV is red, changed up some of the file names, changed the folder structures, things like that to just make it look nice and neat, pushed it to GitHub, and then I finally uploaded it to the Google Web Store as a developer as a zip file in particular, and answered all the questions that they ask you. You put in the new image that I generated from ChatGPT, as well as a image or a background portfolio image or whatever of what the extension does. So I took a snapshot and showed what it does and added that in. And I think you have to pay $20 to be a developer. I already did that already like a year ago, so I don't have to worry. If you do all those things, everything seemed to work out, and I was able to publish everything to the Google Web Store, and I got it done in under 28 hours. So it was a very rewarding experience, but it was very difficult at the same time. I learned a lot from it, mostly about preparation, and I'm happy that I was actually able to get it done. It works well, and it's available on the Google Web Store right now. So if you want to go test it out and crash and burn it, be my guest. If you have any issues or concerns, you can leave me a comment in the video here below, or you can send an issue in GitHub in the repo. The actual link is in the description. The actual long video is in the description as well. So if you wanted to see the long version of this, all 27 plus hours of everything I did, you can see that as well. And if you like the video, you can leave a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, that'd be awesome. And if you have any issues or concerns, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear anything that you guys have to say to be able to learn for the next challenge that I'm going to do or the next thing that I may do. Other than that, it was great doing this project and this experience. I hope people take this project and do great things with it or change it up or whatever. I hope that Netflix Party or Teleparty, the whatever company they are able to see this and maybe incorporate this into their own Google extension. That would be cool. And I hope the rest of everyone's day goes well. Have a good one, everyone. Peace.